Hey, what's up YouTube? This is Cerberus here, or Dark, whichever you want to call me. I'm fine with either one. Alright, this is the ultimate fine-tuning video for your Fusion Elite marker. You got it, you got your settings down, you've been thinking about it, now it's time to put it to good use. Well, you've been using it for a little while, maybe you had a few hiccups or two one day, and you went back to doing your old settings. So let's talk about maybe why some settings did not work, and how to better explain how the Fusion Elite works. Hopefully this will not confuse you. And how we will do this is try and explain how to shoot a paintball with your Fusion Elite. Yes, I know this sounds a little bit confusing. You're like, why is this incorporated into the video? Because since you'll be using your settings to fire a paintball, it is massively important because there's so many little things that can hiccup and happen with your Fusion Elite that could cause problems, especially with the paintball that you use. Alright, so first off, we'll get something out of the way. There are different grades of paint out there. Brittle paint, good paint. You have bad paint, which is paint that is horrible. It doesn't work. And then damaged paint. Let me explain to you what damaged paint is. Do not try to do a brittle paint test with a paintball that you have left in your garage for a week, or in your attic, or one day, one night, I don't care. If it's been out there and it's environmentally not safe for your paintball, guess what? It is damaged paint. All the settings that you get, that you try to use, even if it shoots it, will be not consistent with brittle paint. Brittle paint, the whole paintball in itself is absolutely brittle. It is perfect. It has a form to it. It is not damaged. On paint that you've left out to imitate damaged paint or try to replicate, what ends up happening is that paintball will be damaged in certain areas because it's touched other paintballs. The areas that are exposed will be damaged, and the areas that are being touched by the paintballs will be hard. So this means that, let's say you do a brittle paintball test and you're like, okay, I'm going to shoot 10 paintballs, and you shoot 1 out of 9 and the 9th one busts. You're like, you know what, that wasn't a bad setting, because no, because that means that you might have had it load and then have a hard area hit the front of the bolt. That hard area will save the paintball, and then all of a sudden it rotates, one of them does, and you hit a soft area and it busts it. That doesn't count. If it's not brittle paint, if it's not good paint, if it's older than 5 or 6 months, don't try to do this last video. Whatever, I promise you, you will have a nightmare, you will have a bad time, and it is not a healthy thing, because one thing about the Fusion Elite, it's a tournament marker. It is not something you just load bad paint in. You don't see a professional going in there and taking a new marker and saying, let's do a brittle paint test. Let's go ahead and get paint out of the garage. No, he goes to the field and buys good paint. Reason being, it is mandatory. So let's stress that, get it out of the way. Make sure y'all are understanding, look, you make sure it's good paint before you do this last video. So anyways, we'll put this here for the time being, because I will actually need to take out my bolt and my rammer to try and explain to you how this works. Well, close there, Dark. One more up. Alright. Come on now. Be careful, don't ever over tighten this thing. You just need it snug, okay? Because you can end up with a lot of body problems if you're not careful. Alright. Generally the rammer comes out with it pretty easily. It's covered in lube, which is fine. Put the soft to the side. Put the Allen key back in. Well, no, I'm going to put it back on in a minute. I don't need to. So pull the pin down. Come on, thank you. Alright. We're going to pretend, we'll get the marker back over here, that way you can see. Put the marker over here. Alright. Try to get in line as much as possible. There you go. Alright, so you have air coming from the solenoid, just pushing on the back of your rammer, and then it hits piston in the middle with your OPR and your LPR settings, because they all work in conjunction. So you have your dwell, your board that'll work in conjunction to activate the solenoid, your OPR that's adjusting the power. This is like a funnel once again, and this is going to change the power going to the LPR, and the LPR is going to charge the solenoid. And you can affect how the rammer works from the actual LPR, like give it more, like we talked about, mechanical dwell, by adding more kinetic energy to the rammer. So keep that in mind. Sorry, I need to move this up a little bit higher. Talking and not looking at my camera. Alright. So the paintball is sitting in the very front of the bolt, like right here. And it's not really touching the bolt just yet. Well, I need to move it a little bit so I guess you can see it. So it's just like this. Now, the problem that you can get with trying to use your settings on the paintball is like, let's say for instance, what ends up happening is when you shoot, the air goes through the holes and comes out and creates kind of like a little barrier and like a little pocket in front of the paintball. And what it does is before the bolt moves and hits the paintball, what ends up happening is air is in between it and it forces the paintball out. And then right when it goes out, it hits it as hard as it can with more air, with all of it at one time. Now, one thing you want to be careful with is the bolt return. Remember we talked about how important that was? If the bolt return is faster than dwell, what ends up happening is as it's moving forward, the air cannot get to the paintball in time for that shot and it bumps it. Well, as it travels down the barrel due to whatever damage just from being hit, especially if it's brittle paint, what ends up happening is as it goes down and it hits like one thing overboring. Well, I'll try to explain overboring, underboring, probably not going to be too complicated. Underboring is when the paintball, let's say this is a 689, 685, somewhere around in there. Let's say you're shooting a 684 and it's a 685. When it hits it and it's snugged, when that air hits it finally and it's damaged on the back end, it'll bust it as it's coming through. And when it busts it, it busts down the barrel. One thing you want to look at if you're having bust down your barrel, definitely check your bolt return settings. One thing you can also have a problem with, like, let's use this for example. Let's say your first shot is working great and the paintball is actually coming out, and the next shot the paintball kind of goes, yeah, and it just falls right on out. One thing that ends up happening, 9 times out of 10, the solenoid, it's being cold lately. Remember to keep in mind that air molecules shrink, and in the summer they expand. So one thing that might happen is your LPR is too low because it's what charges the solenoid for your next additional shot. So make sure that that's sitting a little bit higher instead of, like, let's say you're doing 3 1/4 turns or 3 1/12. Go ahead and just put it back at 3 until the day warms up, because you got to remember that this is an aluminum marker, so everything on the inside of it gets cold. So keep that in mind, and the more air you put through it, the colder it gets. Now this doesn't mean to take out trying to make a soft shot, because once again you're trying to implement either a soft shot, more air on the ball, trying to give you a long shot, or trying to get a more efficient shot. We talked about that in the second video. Third video went through the board settings. This last one is trying to apply those settings to the paintball and what outcomes you could get that are a problem. One thing, trying to get a softer shot or a more efficient shot, it does happen to both of them. You can actually get it where the marker is not charging up all the way. So you got to be careful with that. You'll be going back through your dwell setting if that happens, and then your LPR. And if you're, normally I would tell people if they've already done a dwell test for that day, and like let's say it's mid-afternoon and they're like, I'm going to go back to my dwell settings, I don't really recommend that. Just go ahead and do the settings to the LPR. Add a little bit more of a mechanical dwell to it, because generally if you've already done one setting for the dwell, normally that means that it could be the LPR is your problem. With the bolt return being too quick, trying to get you a little bit snappier shot, you can, like I said, the paint bolt will hit the paintball on the back end and damage it. That does happen. That's the reason why a lot of bolts nowadays that are shooting brittle paint, if you'll notice, a lot of bolts have a soft rubber tip. I'm not going to gripe about if they want a soft rubber tip on it. It does help with shooting brittle paint, I know, but you know what? I don't have a problem shooting a hard bolt tip, because generally I know all about my settings. I shoot several cases through my paintball marker before I even get started on a lot of these. So, I mean, I shoot case after case after case after case, and I can shoot, this is a Marbleizer tournament grade. I can shoot any one of these all day long, and I can shoot evils and ultra evils. And people talk about how brittle those paint are and how much problem they have. And if you'll notice that I ain't got a soft tip. So if you look and say you have to have a soft tip, I'm sorry, you just have to be smarter than your marker. I don't mean to be a jerk. It's just logic, because there's going to be air that protects your paintball and it cushions it, and you got to make sure to have that air flowing out fast enough to push the paintball and the bolt not touch it. It's like a game of tag, except you can't tag the paintball. You can't have the bolt touch it. It's got to move in concession to give you the shot that you want, but it's got to push it using air. Basically, kind of like flag football. You don't really want to touch them. You just have to, I mean, basically you can't touch them in flag football either. Probably a bad example, but it'd be alright. But you get the idea. Get back here, paintball. Now, one thing that can end up happening that can cause you problems, bad paint. We talked about damaged paint. Do not try to recreate brittle paint by taking good paint and leaving the garage or doing something dumb like that. Don't do it, please. It does not work. But damn it, bad paint. Bad paint means paint that you get from your paintball field. You buy it and nothing shoots it. I've had bad paint. I've actually got 2 bags over there that is so bad I can't shoot out of anything. And if you're like saying, well, then you have a problem. No, nobody can shoot the paint at all. It is so bad that the paint, it actually, the shell, you could almost see absolutely through it. And it is beginning to separate. It's beginning to be, there's 2 different chemicals in it moving around, and you can actually rotate it with your hands and it just slowly moves with it. That's bad paint. Now, good paint or brittle paint. Good paint, generally, your setting, it can be bumped by the bolt just a little bit, and it does not bother it any. It will still shoot. Like every so often it might bump it and it might drift a different way. But on a lot of brittle paints, it cannot be touched by the bolt. So generally, once again, you're going to be increasing your dwell setting to try to get more air before the bolt is hit on there. But you got to be careful with it because you don't want to put too much air on it where the bolt tries to come back from its return. And it is because, once again, it's doing within that millisecond of it going back and forward, and it's trying to do it as fast as it can. You got to be careful with that. You want to make sure that when it's going forward that the air is already going ahead of the bolt. That's mandatory. And once again, that will also affect a lot of your long balling, because the more air you have behind the ball, the longer it'll fire, the longer it'll travel. The less air you have behind the ball, the more the smoother shot, the more snappier shot you can get from that method. And you're trying to make the marker move as little as possible to try to get you a little snappier shot. You're trying to make it literally to move really very minutely. Now the last one, your efficiency, is going to come by making the marker use as less air as you can possible. Now that will entail your OPR, LPR, and then your solenoid dwell. Once again, those will all be in conjunction together. And a lot of those will affect the paintball in different ways. Now, one thing you can do if you're busting paint real bad, one thing I do recommend, a big thing, if you're used to using one kind of paint and your field has this really nice grade paint, let's just grab another paintball and use this example. And let's say they have really nice brittle paint, and then they have this paint that you've been using for, like, let's say 6 months, 8 months, and you can use it very well. Don't buy a case of the brittle paint and try to use it in one day, especially if you're new to the marker. Buy half and half. There's nothing wrong with that. Reason being is because you don't want to be taking a chance on, for some reason, it going over in your head, and then you end up having a bad day, especially since you're doing this more complex tuning and you're trying to make the marker work for you. Don't get confused. Don't have a bad day. You can even buy just 500 of these. They have that option at a field, and if for some reason it's not tuning well, you still have your 3/4 of a case or half a case of the good paint that you've been using. So keep that in mind. Don't let yourself get upset, especially if this is your first marker you ever had. It's a great marker. The Fusion Elite is one of my favorite markers to use. It's my primary until I get something else better. And right now I can't really justify anything else at the moment. I really do like it. It's a good marker. It shoots really well. What all you can do with this marker is very nice, especially like you want a more cushion shot, you want a more efficient shot, you want a more air on the ball. It's so neat how you can do so many different settings and end up with a completely different marker. If you're talking about how smooth I've gotten mine, the smoothest I've ever gotten my marker is on par, not the exact same, well actually par, that's saying the same, sorry. I've gotten it close to an LV1. Now, I'm not saying it is the exact same. That would be ridiculous because you're dealing with a $700 marker versus a Papa that's $1,500, $1,400 marker. But I will be honest, I have gotten it very close to it. And if you've seen people that have had a Fusion Elite, they will tell you you can get very creepily close to it. So I will be honest to you, it's not going to be on the same level as it, but it can be very close. But like I said, you can do so much with the Fusion Elite, and with it, if it's been your first marker, don't panic. If you have a problem with it, one thing you can do, take your little manual, not this one, but the other one that came with this, the little card, and follow that card one more time. Go through your Dangerous Power tuning method that's on it. Follow it to a T and to a letter. In general, you can shoot just about any grade of tournament or good grade paint with it. And then the next day, take your marker with the battery in it. Get back here, paintball. I ain't done with you. and go back through your flowchart that we talked about in the last video, and then make sure you change all your settings back to that flowchart. That's going to be your default settings. And then once again, start back over. There's nothing wrong with going back over, especially since this is your first marker. A lot of people can get confused and they toss a marker and say, oh, it's broke, I can't use it, or this confuses me. Don't let it confuse you. If you have to, watch my videos over and over and over again to get a better understanding of it. Hit me up with a comment or something if you have a problem. I'll be glad to help you with it. But all you're trying to do, like I said for this video, applying your settings, you want to make sure to get the air to the ball first. And that way, as the bolt moves, and before it hits the piston to unleash the air, it will actually move the paintball without creating that little pocket of air without damaging the paintball. That is the most mandatory thing. You got to keep it from damaging the paintball. And that's under any setting. You've got to make sure that that is a must. Because if you're busting them, the balls are busting down in the barrel. Like, you can unscrew the barrel and there's no paint in the breech, but it's down the barrel. Generally, it's being touched by the bolt. So be careful with that. You can also, one thing, add too much air pressure by using your dwell and your OPR. Once again, the mechanical dwell that comes from the OPR, you can actually increase it too much and it will bust it. But generally, most of those busts that I've ever seen have busted them actually up in here. And once I've seen them actually bust in the breech, then I realized, okay, that is way too much air. One thing that will help you, when you take your barrel, like most people try to do, like I explained earlier, underboring, and it snugs the paintball, you can overbore. There's nothing wrong with overboring. You're going to lose efficiency. That's going to be like a double-edged sword on your efficiency, especially if you're wanting a more efficient shot. But one thing about it is, on very brittle paint, what it'll do is it will not allow it to snug that paintball to bust it. It generally, now you're saying, does it free float absolutely out of the barrel? Most of the time, a lot of your accuracy is going to come off the grade of paint that you use and how well tuned your marker is. The barrel does help, don't get me wrong, but I find that the barrel helps more with efficiency more than anything. If you buy a really good grade paint and you have this tuned down exactly where it needs to be and it's functioned properly. Now, once again, if you're not cleaning your Fusion Elite, if you'll notice how well my rammer is lubed and taken care of. If you are not lubing and taking care of your rammer, and my paintball just fell down. Didn't I tell you to stay up there? No, you don't obey, do you? No, no, no. Get back here. Thank you. Let's get my seat back up together. Sorry, y'all. Technical difficulties. Mr. Paintball's not negotiating well. Anyways, if you're not taking care of the inside, like your solenoids not being maintained, your OPR and your LPR not being maintained, do not expect it to shoot very accurately. I'm sorry, it's a lost cause. But if you're maintaining those correctly and you're buying really good grade paint, like brittle paint, good paint, things of that nature, you're going to find an accuracy difference from those tremendously over just buying a new barrel. Now, don't get me wrong, a barrel will help you with grouping pretty well, but I find that it's like one of those, like it's a good help, but not like the other two kind of help. Always buy good grade paint, always buy good grade. Make sure that your marker's taken care of well, and you won't have a problem at all with it. I've seen people take stock barrels with having those two, like their marker tuned correctly, and buying good grade paint, and with the stock barrel make an impressive grouping. I mean, but once again, if you want efficiency, using your efficiency on your more efficient shot, you got to be doing a more underbore. And if you're doing more of an underbore, you got to be careful not to break the paint. And once again, that's going to involve settings. That's going to involve changing a few little things. So keep that in mind. And one thing I cannot stress, here it is. Keep a note journal of all your settings. This is not my journal settings book. Mine's in my bag. But something similar like this, like graph paper or just line paper where you can keep all your settings and everything you adjust, would be nice. On the back of your instructions, you also have more, you have a little notes section. You can put the settings on the back of there as well. Where is it at? Right there. I'll turn it up so you can read it. See? Make sure to keep tabs on everything that you change. Anything that you change, make sure you have a recording of what you changed, how you changed it, and then make sure that if something goes wrong, to go back to that setting. Generally, 9 times out of 10, that will fix your problem until you go back and you're like saying, well, is changing a thing a problem? No, because in order to get more air on the ball, a more efficient shot, or a little bit smoother shot, you're going to be adjusting a lot of settings. It's just, since those three settings are all going to be dynamically different, when you're trying to go from one setting to another, you might end up changing something or doing something incorrect. So like, let's say you're a real good master of the smooth shot. Now you're wanting to get more of an efficient shot out of it. When you're changing to get more efficiency, you're going to actually lower down how much air your marker is going to use to try to get more efficiency. Well, when that goes into happening, what happens if it's enough that the solenoid does not charge in time? Every time you fire it, the first ball fires fine. The next time you fire, you hear bleh, and the paintball rolls out. Once again, go back through your settings, your OPR, your LPR, your solenoid, your board, and sit there and figure out what you changed. 9 times out of 10, that's going to involve how much air the solenoid is going to be getting. So that is going to involve your dwell and then your LPR. Now, if let's say you're going from a smooth shot to more air on the ball, once again, that's going to involve your solenoid and then your LPR, because then you're going to be trying to put more air on the ball without busting the ball. Now, let's say you're trying to go efficiency to a smoother shot. The smoother shot is going to entail a lot of your bolt reset and your dwell, and then a little bit of your LPR. Your bolt reset, because you're trying to get it as move as little as possible. Also the bolt reset, I've seen people use it for the efficiency because they're trying to close it as fast as they can too. So that's also implied. Once again, that's a different setting that somebody uses. It's going to be different from everybody's marker. But you're like saying how many, you'll get an extra pod out of efficiency. Longer shot, you'll lose a pod or two as far as how many you get per tank fill. But I generally like to have a smoother shot. I want a little bit smoother shot, a little bit more on the ball, and then I'm happy. And that's all I ever use. If you have to, I'll give you the settings of mine, but once again, I can't give you these two, the OPR and the LPR. The reason being is because if I unscrewed both of mine off and then you unscrewed yours off and put them on my gun, put mine on your gun, we'll have two completely different guns to tune in. They will be different between markers because of the metal density between springs and between just faller's tolerances. But one thing I can give you is my board settings. That will help you. In the last video, I should have given you pretty good in-depth view about the board settings on that. But hopefully this will help. If you have any problems, let me know. I'll be glad to help you. It does not bother me at all. But if you need anything more complex than this, let me know once again. I'll help you with it. But that's all I've got for y'all at the moment. So this is Dark. Adios.